The Imperial Nursery Vault of the Valerie Royal Sector was never meant to be a battlefield. Built deep within the hollowed-out obsidian core of the capital moon, it was an architectural masterpiece of soft, ambient bioluminescent lights, cascading water walls, and soothing crystalline melodies designed to keep the royal hatchlings calm while their parents, the High Queen and her warrior fleet, were away clearing the outer borders of the sector from deep space raiders. To the galaxy, the young princess and princes were the absolute future of the Empire, fragile glass-like beings whose bodies had not yet hardened into their adult protective chitin. To guard these precious heirs, the royal court had left behind their most trusted, quiet, and overlooked worker, a human named Marcus. He was not a decorated general or an elite shock trooper. He was simply a low-tier maintenance engineer, a silent human servant wrapped in a worn, grease-stained utility jumpsuit, carrying nothing but a heavy metal toolkit and a quiet disposition that the arrogant alien nobles routinely ignored. He was just a primitive biped from a distant, isolated system, hired to fix broken filtration valves and clean the hydro pools. The Valerie thought they were completely safe behind 3-meter-thick blast doors and localized orbital defense grids. They were tragically wrong. The betrayal came from within the shadow lanes. Without warning, a cloaked raiding party of the Valari's ancient blood enemies, the insectoid Crawl, bypassed the orbital network and dropped directly into the sector via short-range quantum displacement pods. The local garrison was slaughtered in the corridors within minutes, their elegant energy rapiers completely useless against the heavy, brute force kinetic axes of the invaders. As the heavy blast doors of the royal nursery began to groan under the high-temperature thermal cutting torches of the Crawl boarding party, the young royal children huddled together in the furthest corner of the darkened vault, their small, translucent bodies shivering in absolute terror as they wept silver tears into the dark. They screamed for their mother, the Queen, but she was light years away. The only person standing between the terrified children and a brutal, merciless execution was the quiet human servant. Marcus didn't run for the escape pods. He slowly locked the nursery's inner safety gate, stepped toward his heavy mechanical toolkit, and reached past his wrenches to pull out an old, scratched, matte black heavy industrial rivet gun. A tool designed to punch solid titanium bolts into structural starship bulkheads at point-blank range through high-pressure hydraulics. He racked the heavy slide with a loud, echoing crack, his face completely calm. "Stay behind me, kids," Marcus said, his voice dropping into a low, cold, and deadly human growl as the blast doors finally shattered open. The cleaning shift just started. The reinforced 3-meter blast doors didn't just open. They collapsed inward with a deafening, metallic roar that shook the very foundations of the obsidian vault. Dust, pulverized stone, and acrid green chemical smoke poured into the pristine nursery, instantly choking the sweet, perfumed air. Through the thick haze, the terrifying silhouettes of the Crawl shock troops appeared. They were giant, 4-armed insectoid monsters, their bodies covered in thick, dark red chitinous plates that could easily deflect standard alien energy pistols. In their upper claws, they held massive plasma axes that hummed with a lethal emerald radiance, designed to cleave through military armor like hot wax. The lead Crawl commander, a massive brute named Warlord Zool, stepped over the ruined metal plating, his mandibles clicking in a grotesque display of triumph. He expected to find helpless alien infants ripe for ransom or execution. Instead, his compound eyes locked onto a lone human male standing defiantly in the center of the room. Marcus looked absurdly small compared to the towering alien monsters, but his posture was completely rock solid. He wasn't trembling, and he wasn't begging for his life. In his calloused hands, he held the heavy industrial rivet gun, its pneumatic hoses hissing softly like a coiled viper waiting to strike. The Crawl warriors let out a collective, clicking laugh, a sound of utter contempt for what they perceived as a weak, unarmed domestic slave. Zool raised his secondary claw, gesturing casually to his smallest soldier to clear the path. "Remove the primitive pet," the commander hissed through his mechanical vocal translator, his tone dripping with absolute arrogance. Then harvest the royal lineage before the fleet returns. The small crawl warrior lunged forward with blinding speed, its plasma axe raised high for a vertical strike that would split a normal alien civilian perfectly in two. But Marcus didn't try to dodge. He simply took one short, disciplined step forward, planting his heavy leather work boots firmly into the stone floor, and leveled the industrial tool straight at the center of the attacking monster's armored chest plate. There was no elegant hum of a laser or the bright flash of an energy weapon. There was only the violent, deafening, and mechanical bang of high-pressure hydraulics releasing 3,000 pounds of pneumatic force. The heavy industrial rivet gun kicked back violently in Marcus's scarred hands, but his muscular forearms absorbed the recoil effortlessly from years of manual labor. A solid, 6-inch pointed titanium structural rivet left the tool's barrel at point-blank range, traveling fast enough to break the sound barrier inside the enclosed room. The heavy metal bolt didn't care about the crawl warrior's expensive, genetically engineered chitinous plating. It struck the center of the monster's chest with the raw, unadulterated force of a sledgehammer, instantly shattering the thick red shell into 1,000 jagged fragments and driving deep into its vital internal organs. The crawl warrior didn't even have time to scream. The sheer kinetic momentum of the heavy industrial bolt lifted its 200-pound body completely off its feet, throwing it backward through the air until it crashed violently against the outer obsidian wall, pinned to the stone like a grotesque bug in a museum display. The remaining crawl shock troops instantly stopped laughing. The heavy, rhythmic clicking of their mandibles froze in absolute, unadulterated shock. They had conquered dozens of civilized worlds whose armies used predictable energy metrics and followed rules of warfare. They had never in their entire stellar history encountered a primitive domestic servant who weaponized literal factory construction tools to execute a fully armored elite soldier in a fraction of a millisecond. Marcus didn't give them a single moment to process their panic. He calmly reached into his jumpsuit pocket, pulled out a fresh strip of heavy titanium rivets, and slammed them into the pneumatic feeding chamber with a cold, metallic snap that echoed through the sudden, terrified silence of the nursery. "Flank him right now," Warlord Zool roared through his mechanical translator, his synthetic voice cracking with a sudden, desperate surge of raw fury and extreme confusion. "He is just a single, soft-skinned domestic animal. Do not stand in a straight line. Kill him from the sides and tear his limbs apart." The remaining 4 crawl shock troops immediately scattered across the burning nursery floor, their heavy, clawed feet scratching loudly against the polished obsidian stone as they tried to utilize their superior numbers to overwhelm the lone human from multiple angles at once. 2 giant warriors rushed from the left corridor, hiding behind the massive decorative stone pillars, while the other 2 leapt effortlessly over the broken water features from the right side, their heavy plasma axes glowing hotter as they drew emergency overcharge power directly from their armor packs. But Marcus didn't panic or lose his footing for a single fraction of a second. He possessed the cold, analytical, and highly disciplined mind of a seasoned engineer who spent his entire life analyzing structural weak points, load tolerances, and machine failures under extreme stress. To him, the rapidly moving alien warriors weren't terrifying mythological monsters. They were simply heavy, moving mechanical parts in a highly dangerous system that needed to be systematically, brutally shut down one by one. He spun sharply to his left, tracking the first runner with practiced, fluid precision. Bang! Another 6-inch titanium rivet screamed through the thick gray smoke, catching the left attacker directly through its vulnerable, unarmored knee joint, instantly severing the complex biomechanical structure and sending the giant 4-armed monster crashing to the floor in a screaming, helpless heap of glowing green blood. Before the second left side warrior could adjust its running trajectory or raise its weapon, Marcus closed the distance head-on, driving the heavy, solid steel butt of the rivet gun directly into its mandibles with a sickening, echoing crunch that shattered its jaw entirely and sent it reeling backward into the toxic smoke. But the remaining 2 warriors from the right side had already successfully closed the distance. A glowing emerald plasma axe swung horizontally through the haze with terrifying velocity, the superheated energy blade slicing cleanly through Marcus's utility leather belt and carving a deep, smoking laceration across his right ribs. Bright human blood, dark and burning red, began to stain his gray jumpsuit instantly, but Marcus didn't even flinch or let out a cry. He simply gripped his cold iron tool tighter, his eyes turning into blocks of absolute ice as he prepared to deliver the final counter-strike. Behind the heavy, reinforced inner safety gate, the three young Valerie children watched the brutal, bloody spectacle unfolding before them in absolute awe and paralyzing terror. They had been taught from their very birth by their royal tutors that humans were a tragic, broken, and inferior species that had lost their own home system centuries ago. A race only fit for low-level manual labor because they completely lacked the advanced telepathic networks, elegant crystal structures, or artistic brilliance of the civilized worlds. But as they pressed their small faces against the cold iron bars now, they didn't see a broken, submissive slave. They saw a terrifying, majestic, and completely unbreakable wall of pure flesh and unyielding iron. The eldest princess, her crystal eyes wide with overflowing silver tears, wrapped her small arms tightly around her two younger brothers, holding them close to her chest as the violent shockwaves of the mechanical gunfire vibrated deeply through their fragile, unhardened bones. Every single time the heavy, deafening bang of the industrial rivet gun echoed through the vault, she felt a strange, primal, and deeply comforting sense of security she had never experienced in her entire life. The human wasn't fighting for military medals, galactic glory, or fancy royal titles. He was fighting with the raw, stubborn, and protective ferocity of an apex predator defending its nest from intruders. Outside the gate, Marcus was actively bleeding from 3 different, deep wounds now. The emerald plasma axe had severely burned the skin on his right side, and a jagged piece of flying stone shrapnel from a shattered pillar had sliced his left cheek wide open. But his eyes remained entirely focused, cold, and pale blue like winter ice. He caught the third attacking crawl warrior by its upper right claw, utilizing his superior mammalian skeletal leverage to twist the joint completely out of its socket with a horrific, wet popping sound that filled the corridor. While the massive insectoid monster screamed in agonizing pain, Marcus pressed the hot, smoking barrel of the heavy rivet gun directly under its chin and pulled the trigger without a single moment of hesitation, ending the threat instantly as the Titan collapsed. Only Warlord Zul remained standing at the shattered entrance now, his massive red-armored body trembling with a mixture of intense, uncontrolled rage and a primitive, ancestral feeling he had never felt before in his entire military career. Absolute, suffocating fear of a lone human. Warlord Zul stepped back into the burning ruins of the corridor, his heavy, ragged breathing causing his thick chest plates to hiss violently as superheated steam escaped from his armor's damaged cooling vents. He looked down at the bodies of his elite shock troops scattered across the ruined nursery floor, their heavy, engineered armor pierced through and through by primitive, heavy construction spikes. He looked at the thick trail of green alien blood mixing with the dark, burning red human blood in the dust. His entire top-secret mission, his perfect military reputation, and his pride had been completely ruined by a single, grease-stained maintenance man. "You are an evolutionary mistake," Zul hissed, his mechanical vocal translator cracking with a terrifying mixture of intense rage and desperation. His lower claws reached behind his back to unlatch a heavy, restricted weapon that was strictly banned by galactic law. A portable thermal imploder designed to completely clear underground military bunkers. It was an absolutely suicidal weapon to use inside an enclosed obsidian vault. The resulting kinetic and thermal blast would instantly vaporize the entire nursery, the royal children, and Marcus all at once. But the proud Kral warlord was simply too arrogant to accept a humiliating, unthinkable defeat at the hands of a common domestic servant. He began to forcefully activate the device, its heavy containment core humming with an unstable, terrifying orange light that made the air vibrate. "If I cannot harvest the royal heirs for my empire, then this entire moon will become their final burial vault." Inside the nursery, Marcus instantly realized his industrial rivet gun was completely dead. The last pneumatic pressure hose had been cleanly severed during the brutal struggle, and the analog pressure gauge was sitting at an absolute zero. He dropped the useless, heavy piece of iron to the stone floor with a loud, metallic clatter that signaled his lack of ammunition. He looked back through the smoke at the safety gate, seeing the terrified, crystalline faces of the 3 young children looking at him for protection. He didn't say a single word, and he didn't try to run for the exit. He simply reached down into his shattered, heavy steel toolkit and picked up a massive, 2-foot-long solid steel adjustable pipe wrench. He gripped the cold, heavy iron handle with both of his hands, his knuckles turning completely white as his muscles tensed. He didn't have high-tech armor, he didn't have energy shields, and he didn't have a single second to waste. He took a deep breath, braced his broken body, and ran straight toward the glowing weapon of the warlord. The final confrontation between man and warlord was a brutal, chaotic blur of primitive violence and superheated energy. Warlord Zul swung his remaining plasma axe with frantic, desperate speed, the emerald blade leaving bright, sizzling trails of superheated gas in the air that scorched the ancient obsidian walls into black glass. Marcus dodged the first horizontal strike by a fraction of an inch, the intense cosmic heat singeing his hair and burning the fabric of his collar. But the second strike was too fast to fully avoid. The glowing edge caught his left shoulder, burning through the heavy canvas of his jumpsuit and searing his flesh down to the bare bone in a fraction of a second. The pain was absolutely apocalyptic, a blinding white flash of agony that was more than enough to cause a normal alien warrior to faint instantly from neurogenic shock. But Marcus simply grunted, his teeth grinding together so hard that his back molars cracked under the pressure. He didn't drop his weapon. Instead, he used the violent momentum of the warlord's own strike to swing his heavy, solid steel adjustable pipe wrench upward with every single ounce of remaining strength left in his muscular body. The unyielding steel tool struck the warlord's lower left elbow joint with a horrific, metallic smash, shattering the complex alien bone structure beneath the armor and forcing Zul to drop the glowing thermal imploder to the floor. The highly dangerous orange device rolled away into the shadows, its digital countdown timer blinking rapidly as it began its lethal sequence. Before the giant warlord could recover his balance or react to the fracture, Marcus brought the heavy wrench down again with a furious, vertical smash that cracked the warlord's primary reinforced helmet visor, completely exposing his wet, blinking insectoid face beneath. The 2 heavy fighters crashed violently into the burning debris and dust, clawing, punching, and tearing at each other like wild beasts in the thick smoke. Zul used his massive size and weight advantage to pin the human down onto the shattered stone, his upper claws crushing Marcus's throat with immense hydraulic pressure, trying to suffocating the remaining life out of his lungs. "Die, you primitive domestic pet!" Zul screamed through his broken, sparking translator. Marcus's vision began to turn completely black around the edges as his air supply was brutally cut off. His lungs burned like fire, and his chest muscles screamed for oxygen. But even as his physical body began to fail him, his human mind remained entirely steady and focused. He groped through the sharp debris with his bleeding right hand until his calloused fingers wrapped around the cold, familiar handle of a heavy steel crowbar. With a final, explosive surge of raw adrenaline that overrode every single pain receptor in his nervous system, Marcus drove the sharp, hooked end of the heavy steel crowbar directly into the exposed neck seal of the Crawl warlord's armor. The cold, unyielding iron bit deep into the soft, unprotected alien tissue, severing the primary neural pathways that controlled the monster's massive upper limbs. Warlord Zul's suffocating grip on Marcus's throat instantly went completely limp, his eyes widening in sudden shock as his massive body collapsed sideways into the dark dust with a wet, heavy thud. Marcus lay there on his back for 3 long, agonizing seconds, gasping violently for air, his chest heaving as the sweet oxygen returned to his burning lungs and cleared the black fog from his vision. But the fight wasn't over yet. The portable thermal imploder on the floor was still actively blinking, its crimson digital countdown display showing exactly 12 seconds before total detonation. Marcus crawled forward on his hands and knees, dragging his broken, bleeding left leg behind him across the sharp stone debris like a wounded soldier. He reached the glowing orange device, his hands covered in a thick mixture of his own red blood and the green ichor of his enemies. His fingers were shaking violently from severe nerve damage and sheer physical exhaustion, making it almost impossible to perform any kind of delicate technical task. He couldn't remember the complex electronic diffusal codes for military alien technology. He didn't know how to access the internal motherboard or rewire the energy cells. He had to rely on his core, primitive human instinct. If you can't fix a machine with code, you break it with absolute force. He raised the heavy steel pipe wrench one final time, channeling every single ounce of his remaining life force into his arms, and smashed it directly down into the imploder's fragile glass fuel cell regulator. The thick glass housing shattered into 1,000 pieces, and the highly volatile thermal fluid poured out harmlessly onto the cold stone floor, evaporating into the air before it could reach critical mass. The digital countdown timer went completely black. The dangerous orange glow vanished. The nursery was silent once again, saved by nothing but a human's stubborn refusal to die. The heavy iron safety gate gave a long, high-pitched metallic creak as it was slowly, carefully pushed open from the inside. The three young Valerie children stepped out into the ruined, smoking corridor, their tiny, delicate feet stepping carefully around the massive bodies of the giant crawl monsters that once filled their nightmares. They looked at the absolute, terrifying tabahi around them. The beautiful water features shattered into thousands of glass pieces, the pristine obsidian walls blackened and cracked by plasma fire, and the air thick with the suffocating smell of burned iron and ozone. But their crystal eyes quickly locked onto the center of the room, where Marcus was sitting heavily against a broken stone pillar, his head resting back against the cold surface. His eyes were tightly closed, his breathing was incredibly shallow, and his face was completely pale from the massive blood loss he had endured. The youngest prince, a tiny toddler whose crystalline skin was still soft blue, and translucent, walked slowly toward the bleeding human, his tiny body trembling. He didn't see a frightening, dirty alien servant anymore. He saw his protector, his savior. The child reached out his tiny, three-fingered hand, gently touching Marcus's calloused, blood-stained thumb with absolute tenderness. Marcus's eyes slowly opened, his pale blue gaze softening instantly as he looked down at the safe, uninjured child standing before him. He let out a weak, raspy laugh that quickly turned into a painful cough, his hand gently moving to shield the boy from the sharpest debris. "Told you. Kids," Marcus whispered, his voice barely audible through the heavy static of the room's ruined life support systems. "The cleaning shift is finally done. You're completely safe now." The eldest princess knelt beside him in the dust, tears streaming down her glowing face as she used her fine silk ceremonial royal scarf to gently, reverently wipe the hot blood from his seared shoulder. It was a gesture of absolute respect that her proud aristocratic species usually reserved only for their ancient gods or cosmic kings. She looked at his deep scars, understanding for the first time that beneath the soft, unarmored skin of this human lay a spirit made of pure titanium. High above the capital moon, space itself violently ruptured as the Valerie royal fleet dropped out of hyperspace with terrifying speed. 50 heavy, gold-plated battle cruisers formed a massive defensive line around the sector, their orbital weapons humming with energy, ready to hunt down any raider fleet. The High Queen's personal flagship landed directly on the royal palace pads, its massive anti-gravity thrusters firing with a deafening roar that shook the entire mountain. The Queen herself, a magnificent and imposing being covered in shimmering sapphire armor and carrying a glowing energy lance, ran through the palace corridors with her elite personal guard. She had received the delayed distress signal light years away and fully expected to find her ancestral home turned into a cold, silent tomb. Her heart pounded with absolute terror as she reached the shattered entrance of the royal nursery, seeing the massive bodies of the elite crawl troops lying in the hallway. She prepared herself for the worst sight a mother could ever endure in her life. But as she stepped through the ruined blast doors, she froze in absolute, unadulterated astonishment. Her 3 children were not dead, and they weren't being held hostage. They were sitting in a quiet corner of the room, completely safe and uninjured, their crystal skin glowing softly. And standing guard over them, using a broken steel pipe as a makeshift crutch to keep his bleeding body upright, was her silent human maintenance worker, Marcus. He was covered from head to toe in black soot, white ash, and deep red blood, but his eyes were completely steady as he looked at the royal guards. He looked like an ancient war god standing amidst the rubble, refusing to drop his guard until he was certain the danger had passed. The elite guards instantly raised their weapons in confusion, unsure of what had transpired, but the queen raised her claw, silencing them instantly as she looked at the scene with tears forming in her crystalline eyes. The High Queen dropped her glowing golden energy lance to the floor, the heavy weapon clattering loudly against the shattered stone as she rushed forward, throwing her arms around her 3 children in a desperate, emotional embrace. She checked their fragile crystal skin with trembling claws, finding no cracks, injuries, or burns on their small bodies. "How is this even possible?" she whispered, her powerful telepathic voice echoing directly through the minds of her elite guards who had just flooded into the ruined room with their weapons drawn. "The Crawl sent an elite assassination squad bypassed our orbital grid. Who fought them off? Where is the capital garrison army that was supposed to guard this sector?" The eldest princess looked up from her mother's sapphire armor, her hand pointing directly toward the heavily wounded human who was still standing near the broken pillar, his body swaying slightly from sheer exhaustion. "There was no garrison, mother," the princess said, her voice filled with a deep, unbreakable pride that stunned the royal court. "The guards ran away or died in the first minutes. Marcus stayed. He didn't run. He locked us behind the safety gate and fought them alone with nothing but the iron tools from his maintenance box. He took the plasma fire on his own skin so we could live in the dark." The queen slowly rose to her full, imposing height, her shimmering sapphire armor reflecting the red emergency lights of the nursery. She looked at Marcus, really looked at him, for the very first time in her life. For 3 years, he had been a mere ghost in her palace, a silent biped who cleaned her floors and fixed her water machines, someone she had never deemed worthy of a single spoken word or a second glance. Now, he was the only reason her family lineage still existed. She walked toward him with slow, majestic steps, her elite guards immediately falling to their knees behind her in a display of absolute, unadulterated respect for the battlefield they were witnessing. The High Queen stopped exactly 2 paces in front of the bleeding human. According to ancient, strict Valerie protocol, a common alien worker was supposed to bow completely to the floor, pressing their forehead to the stones in the presence of royalty. But Marcus didn't move an inch. He couldn't bow even if he wanted to. His broken left leg wouldn't allow the movement, and his stubborn human pride wouldn't let him lower his head while he was still holding the line. The queen didn't demand a bow. Instead, she did something that completely shocked her elite inner circle and the high nobles standing in the doorway. She unclasped her ceremonial golden royal cloak, a sacred, priceless garment woven from rare stellar threads that symbolized the absolute sovereignty of her house, and gently wrapped it around Marcus's broad, scarred shoulders, covering his torn, grease-stained jumpsuit. "You are bleeding heavily, human," the queen said, her vocal synthesizer translating her powerful telepathic thoughts into soft, deeply reverent words. "Our finest royal medical teams are already on their way to this room. You have spilled your own precious red blood to protect the blue crystals of my house. This galaxy will never, ever forget what you did in this vault today. Your name will be carved into our history." Marcus looked down at the expensive golden fabric resting on his blood-soaked shoulders, then back at the queen, a faint, tired smile touching his pale lips. "Don't worry about it, Your Majesty," Marcus rasped, his voice rough and dry like gravel. "Where I come from, back on Earth, We have a very simple rule. You don't let the innocent pay the price for the monsters. Now, if it's all the same to you, I think my shift is officially over." His eyes slowly rolled back into his head. His grip on the steel pipe loosened, and his exhausted body finally gave out completely, collapsing forward into the dust as unconsciousness took him. 2 weeks later, Marcus's severe injuries had completely and thoroughly healed, leaving behind thick, deep silver scars across his broad shoulder and chest that he wore like permanent medals of honor. He was formally escorted by a full battalion of golden-armored royal guards into the Grand Imperial Court, a massive, cathedral-like room filled with thousands of elite alien nobles, high-ranking diplomats, and powerful military leaders representing 6 different solar systems. The colossal room went completely, breathlessly silent as Marcus walked down the central crystal aisle, no longer wearing his grease-stained maintenance jumpsuit, but a clean, dark military formal uniform provided by the highest tailor of the palace. At the far end of the grand hall sat the High Queen herself on her magnificent obsidian throne, surrounded by her family. As Marcus reached the exact center of the court, the Queen slowly rose from her seat, holding a massive, historic document known as the Golden Fleet Charter. Before this entire galactic assembly, the Queen's powerful voice boomed through the massive hall, echoing in every mind. "I officially declare that the species known as humanity is no longer to be considered a transient, low-tier workforce within our imperial borders. From this historic day forward, Earth is universally recognized as a sovereign shield world of the Valerie Empire. An attack on a single human will be treated as an act of total, uncompromising war against my own throne." The thousands of arrogant alien nobles in the audience didn't protest or complain about this sudden, massive political shift. They all looked up at the giant holographic projection screens above the throne, which were playing the recovered, raw security footage from the nursery vault, watching a single human with a steel wrench systematically dismantle an elite crawl squad. They understood perfectly well that having humans as allies was the greatest security insurance policy the galaxy could ever offer. After the grand, historic ceremony concluded, High Archon Varus, the supreme commander who had arrived with the rescue fleet, walked slowly beside Marcus on the outer balcony of the Imperial Palace. They both looked out at the beautiful, massive metallic starships arriving from Earth to establish the new interstellar alliance, their heavy hulls reflecting the light of 3 suns. "Tell me, Marcus," Varus asked softly, his brilliant blue crystal skin glowing as the warm sunset of the capital moon hit his face. "Your species has been isolated for nearly 2 centuries. You have been routinely ignored, overlooked, and looked down upon by almost every major empire in this civilized sector. Why did you stay in that room when the blast doors blew open? Why did you risk your entire life for children who weren't even of your own kind?" Marcus stopped walking, leaning his heavy arms against the cold marble balcony rail as the warm wind caught his hair and rustled his new uniform. He looked out into the vast, unending dark void of space, his mind drifting back to the old, painful history of his own home planet. A long time ago, when Earth was young, weak, and fractured, we looked up at the stars and screamed into the dark for help during our own apocalyptic wars, Marcus said, his voice carrying the deep, unbreakable, and ancient weight of humanity's soul. No one answered our calls. We were left entirely alone in the dark to fight our own monsters, and we nearly didn't make it as a species. On that day, when we finally stood up from the ashes, we made an absolute, sacred promise to ourselves. We swore that we would eventually become the answer that we ourselves never got. If another species is screaming in the dark because of monsters, a human will always show up to stand in the fire. Varus looked at him in absolute, stunned silence, finally understanding that the true, terrifying power of humanity didn't lie in their heavy starships, plasma shields, or kinetic railguns. It lay in their beautiful, terrifying, and completely unconditional refusal to let the innocent stand alone against the dark.